Morning, folks. Welcome to the Fife Property Show. We're going to be talking today about Fife first-time buyers have been locked out the Fife Property Market. Before we go into that, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. Had a really busy week. Going to have a really busy weekend as well, and then it'll be straight back to Monday morning. So always something to do.
Yeah, Richard, how are you getting on?
Yeah, lettings is really busy now. We're picking up a lot of good opportunities and just kept really busy throughout the week and through the weekends as well. So I think the weeks and the weekends it's just one big long week now.
It does seem like that, eh? I mean, the market's still booming. I mean, we're in almost to the end of November and the market's still going like a fair. I mean, I hate, I got 100,000 more for a property yesterday. I could not believe it. £100,000 more. That is unbelievable. For that, I think that's the highest we've ever had.
I think that's really good. That is really good. I mean, obviously, we've seen a lot of upturn in obviously what we're receiving for properties for sale and rent just now, but that's a good result.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, amazing, but not surprising considering the way the market's going. Good morning, everybody. Anyway, it's everybody that's watching. You know, wherever you're from, if you want to put in the comments wherever you're from, we will give you a shout out and see how it's going on. But we'll follow on with our main article today. So, as the Fife first-time buyers have been locked out the Fife property market, rents have actually risen in the last 12 months by an average of 2.8%. With the banks reducing the number of low deposit mortgages, I mean, that's really, deposits are coming down to, they're needing 10% or they're needing 15% as first-time buyers, and even the second-time buyers, at least, have gone, it's gone a wee bit AWOL just now. Since COVID hit in the spring, this has meant the number of Fife first-time buyers, put my teeth back in, guys, have been decreasing quickly, meaning many of those would-be first-time Fife buyers wanting to make that first step onto the Fife property ladder are having to stay in the Fife rental sector. I mean, you've got thoughts about that anyway, haven't you, Andrea? And before we talk about that, we'll just introduce a couple of people. Morning, James. How are you? Welcome. Thanks for watching the show. Morning, Joanna. And morning, Jim. Yep, crazy prices going on just now. It's like that. So over to you, Andrea. Why do people choose to go into the rental sector and stay there, or is it a choice?
I think sometimes, I mean, I have known people that have always been either in the private rented sector or then they've managed to get into council, social housing, but that was the way they were brought up, and it was a thing that their parents did, so they followed suit. And they just stayed there, and a lot of them have got really nice homes, so why move anywhere else? They're in the area that they want to be, and they're surviving, they've got a nice place, got children in good schools, they don't want to move. However, there are people that do want to get out of a rental property and own their own, and have the thoughts of, well, I'm paying X amount for somebody else's mortgage when I could be putting that towards my own property. So I think a lot of the things, it could be fear. You don't want to get into owning an own home and then get into financial difficulties and then end up going down the line of repossession and the shame. I mean, there's a big stigma against being repossessed. So
you're cheery this morning.
You're right, Andrea.
We're 4 minutes into the show and we're talking about repossessions already.
You chose to put me on first.
You make a lot of good points.
There might also be like the commitment. It's a huge commitment owning a property, and not everybody's wages are going up by the huge percentage that the properties are going up by, and even for the rentals as well. So I mean, I think people are kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place and deciding, is it time to move on? Can I get the finances to purchase? When I do purchase, am I going to be able to afford to have the upkeep? Because when you are in a rented property, you don't have to worry about the roof, the walls, the upkeep of the garden. If the cooker breaks down, you've got a landlord there that owns the property. So as soon as you move out of a rental and into your own property, you've got those financial burdens all on your own, unless you go for purchasing a flat. And then you've got shared costs. So there is an advantage to going into a flat, but for some reason they don't seem to be selling just quite as well.
This is quite an interesting comment that Joanna said. I mean, long-term renting is the norm in Europe. It is actually. You know, when you go to places like Germany and that, I mean, 80% of the market's actually renting. But then they buy later in life. We are in the UK are different though through the process, and we're only renting from the mortgage company. Really, you know, that's it in reality. You know, I mean, that's how we're taught to look at it. I mean, we've been a nation of home buyers since probably the 80s. And yet back in, I think it was the 1955s, the 1950s, about 55% of the UK market was actually private rented. You know, it wasn't really the done thing to actually own your house. It was just a thing to do, was actually to rent all the time.
I think you raise a few good points, Andrea, and there is people that just choose to rent, and that's what they like to do. It suits their circumstances, and like you say, they didn't have the responsibility of upkeep, maintenance of a property, whether it be the boiler, the roofs, and which could all be costly repairs if need to be done. And people are happy at that. But there is people that want to get onto the property ladder, and as the article states, obviously, the change in obviously what mortgage products are available now is obviously influencing people being able to get on the market, and that's why they're renting longer now to try and obviously save off bigger deposit, because that's what they need now. So
I've had house sellers before actually moving out and moving into one of my properties to rent, only to say that it's a temporary measure, and yet 5 years later they're still there. But what the big advantage for them was, they said, you know, to be honest, it was great from the point of view that I used to tell my friends, all I need to do is pick the phone up to Jim and everything would be sorted. You know, so the roof would be sorted, the kitchen would be, you know, sorted, the plumbing would be sorted, the heating would be sorted, everything would be sorted just like that. And that's where they felt they were actually really comfortable being in the rented sector, you know, for the fact that they didn't have that. It's like what you say, Andrea, they didn't have that financial obligation. They were only committed to actually renting a property from month to month. Therefore, they weren't bound into a mortgage. You know, that's quite a big pressure for a lot of people, especially with when you think about the temporary contracts we have now and the way 0 hours working still works.
Yeah, the new private residential tenancy just makes it so much simpler for a tenant. They don't feel like they're tied in for such a long period or obligated, like what, maybe not to the extent of a mortgage, but in the same kind of aspect. I think as well, you made the point about obviously tenants making the comment on I'm paying the rent to pay their mortgage. And Joanna makes a good point. Well, you're not really. I mean, if you've got a mortgage, buy-to-let mortgage and interest only, then that's not the case. So I don't like when people kind of refer to it like that. But
well, sometimes you know, I could understand. The key is here how that's seen is, well, why would I want to pay the rent if I could just pay a mortgage anyway and actually own a capital element of the property and actually kind of like a savings plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the capital that you're paying down is actually a commitment to actually save towards your future and the equity in your property. The key here is to make sure that the property that you're buying is actually still going to continue to increase in value over the years. Or if you're, and we'll talk about property prices later on, because it's quite startling between the tenures and the types of properties and the styles, how much the property prices have actually moved up. But we'll talk about that later on. And that, you know, I think people will be really surprised at why that is the case. You know, so you know, we've got the bits about why people stay. Is there anything else we want to cover than that, though? Why people would stay in private rented sector, or why people would choose not to be in it? I mean, some people just don't choose to be in it at all. They don't want to.
No, but I think, like you stated as well, like your own experiences and things. If people get into the situation where they're in a rented property and they find that they've got a good agent or a good landlord and they're very responsive, very proactive, and make sure that the property is well looked after, and then they didn't feel the need to move. They feel comfortable enough where they are. I think that's a big one.
There's a great point by Joanna. She actually says we should change the thought process and push rented as some people feel they have to buy to appear to be achieving. Yeah. Is that a big pressure on people? If you don't own your house, you're looked at as a second-class citizen.
Inferior.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, and people do have that mindset where it's like this is what they need to strive towards to own their house, to have this kind of status in society, but that's not the case. In some cases, rents are, to be able to afford rents for some properties is a lot more than what people could do when they're paying a mortgage. So, I mean, monetary wise, it's not really that.
I mean, even the thought process about owning your own property, right? Let's look at it this way. This could be looked at another way. You own your own property. You spent all your money. You invested in your property for the rest of your life. You built it up to a huge fund. It has no mortgage on it anymore. You get it all. The state takes your money, and that's the end of it. And you have the person that lived in rented accommodation all their life laughing at you.
Yeah.
Because basically all your wealth has disappeared to the state.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen it. A lot of people who have got parents and things that have lived in properties all their life, they've paid the mortgage off, they're mortgage free, and unfortunately maybe they end up care in a home, and the state take it all, the majority anyway, to look after them. So is it the thought
process that really, I mean, what I was advocating at some point was that in the future is you look to give your children the property and actually become a lifetime tenant.
Yeah.
And therefore, you don't have any responsibility for the property anymore because your children look after it, but it's their asset now. But you're a lifetime tenant, so you've got a guaranteed property for the rest of your life, rent-free.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good plan.
It is. It's a brilliant plan. Andrea, have you got anything else to add to, the difference?
I think people, if they're going to go down that route of, putting the property over to the children, they need to do it well in advance, because you never know at what point, here's me being really morbid and everything again, but you never know when something's going to happen and you lose that capacity to make that decision. And, even for things like power of attorney and anything like that, if you become unable to make that decision, you then can't get a power of attorney and then has to go through courts for people that can then act on your behalf. So if I would say if you own a property, don't be selfish about it. You need to think ahead. I mean, it's simple. If you buy a parrot, there is a legal obligation that you have to have a legally bound document saying what will happen to that parrot in the event of your death.
This is the analogy this morning, eh?
You learn something new every day.
Here's the correlation between a parrot being correlated, strong correlation to a house.
Well, parrots live for so long. It's probably the same for tortoises, but parrots live for so long. It is a legal obligation to have a written document to state who will look after your parrot if you die or become unable to look after it. And it should be the same about your houses. It should be the same about your property, because it's a massive asset.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when you think about the logic of this is taking us off a wee bit of the beaten track, but it's important to cover it anyway. The very fact is, you should have a legal obligation to actually put a will in place, straight away. This is quite interesting what Joanna said, and I agree with this completely. Splitting the title can save people losing their property to the state to fund care costs. So it's worth looking at and looking into splitting the title. Thanks for that, Joanna. I appreciate that. Okay, guys, so this has caused the demand to grow amongst Fife renters for larger homes to ride out COVID, as they hunker down for the long haul to wait for normality to return to the property market. Normality? Well, I'm going to say whoever would have predicted what's going to happen now, but if you look back my articles from April, I did actually predict this. When everybody else said, no, this isn't what's going to happen. There's going to be a huge property crash. So that's interesting because it's all documented on our blog, where I actually had this prediction that we would have an increase in the property market after this and into the winter and into next year as well. And I think that will continue to happen. So this has caused Fife rents to rise from £752 per month to the current £773 per month over the last 12 months, an increase of 2.8%. I mean, even an average rent right across Fife of £773 is quite a lot of money. I mean, do you have that broken down into some regions, Richard?
I mean, overall, like obviously the average rents are pushing 800, and you're under about the 3% increase. But if you look at I've looked at the stats, and like areas individually, like East Nukes, £702 have jumped up to £724, which is a 3.1% increase. And the Leavenmouth area been £442 jumping up to £455, which is 2.9% increase.
Has Leavenmouth ever actually moved up over the years? Because I remember years ago when you know, I mean, we're talking about 15 years ago here, where I was renting, I was still getting 450 for a 2-bedroom flat.
Yeah.
You know, and now we're still getting 450. How do you think that's come about? Is that because, for me personally, I think it's because there's a lot of players come into the market, the letting agents, and they've basically, for want of a better phrase, they've actually pulled all the prices down by just giving away property at great values. I mean, it's fantastic for Leavenmouth tenants, but it's no great for Leavenmouth landlords.
No, and I have noticed that over the years as well. It's kind of stayed, it's levelled out and stayed at that for a lot of years, whereas areas like Cooper and St Andrews and East Neuk have all continued to rise, and even areas like Kirkcaldy and things as well in Glenrothes. But yeah, I have noticed that in Leaven. I mean, because of the demand at the moment, we're pushing prices up on an individual basis with properties because we've got so much interest. But in terms of obviously the market them at a level, like you say, 2-bedroom flats are still at 450. Unless you're in maybe some certain streets and things that are a wee bit more prestigious than others.
Well, 2-bedroom houses can get what, 495? Would you say? I mean, when you're good quality, you're getting 520, 525. I mean, that's what I'm getting, 520. You know, but that's 520 completely refurbished. Yeah,
obviously at a good standard. Yeah.
I mean, this is quite interesting just to probe on that subject then. So do you think it's worth a landlord actually completely refurbishing their property and the investment in there and doing that in order to get a higher rent? Do you think that's entirely achievable? Because Stephen Clark has that in Aberdeen. You know, a lot of the landlords there have tired properties and they're not renting their properties. He goes and does a complete refurb and all of a sudden filled. Maximum rent even higher than what they're asking.
Yeah, I think if you're a landlord and you've got properties and obviously they've not been looked at for a few years and they're a bit tired and you're struggling to fill them, then I think that a wee bit money input into them. If the numbers work for you, obviously, putting a wee bit of money into them, bringing them up to standard, having them at a good standard to finish, attracts a better tenant and obviously allows you to achieve a wee bit of higher rent, definitely.
So some of the other rental figures you've got?
Like Cooper's 673 up to 690 a month, which is 2.6% increase. St Andrews, obviously, quite a different market for the rest of Fife and sales and lettings, but obviously 1,161 up to 1,197, which is 3.1.
That's how anybody can afford that. But then we get that in the East Neuk, don't we? We've got properties that are getting, what, 1,400 per month? Yeah, in the East Neuk area. Here's quite an interesting comment from Jimmy Mullen. So, Jimmy, is there a benefit to letting a property furnished?
Not always. I mean, generally, I would say to do unfurnished. If you're in areas like the East Neuk and St Andrews, because it's holiday let territory and obviously students and things, sometimes it's expected. But generally, to reduce the liability for the landlord and things with furnishings and that, I would recommend do unfurnished. But like I say, white goods and things are sometimes expected, and a lot of kitchens now have got like integrated ovens and hobs and things. I think a lot of your properties have that, Jim. But furnishings, unless you're in areas, certain areas of East Neuk and St Andrews, then it doesn't really serve a great purpose as such.
From a lot of them
bring their own stuff.
From a personal point of view, I did furnished completely because the 10% wear and tear allowance that the government was given on taxation, so they were up on the top line rents. But as soon as they took away the 10% wear and tear allowance, I thought it wasn't beneficial anymore to do furnished. Because it was a good tax advantage. So they took that away completely, and I went, right, that's it, unfurnished completely now. So it's gone from the point that you used to get a 10% wear and tear allowance to now that whenever you buy furnishings, it can be completely offset straight away against your profits.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'll even change that, because they've changed the mortgage interest deduction. You know, so what else are they going to change? I mean, there's talk of capital gains getting changed as well for second homeowners. I mean, that's a frightening prospect for a lot of landlords that have actually built a huge portfolio over a period of time. Me. and then to find out that it's getting taken away from them, basically, because it's like, oh, by the way, we'll just take that away from you and dip into your bank account effectively in your retirement plan in order to fund everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, that's effectively what some landlords are having to go through now.
Yeah, and it is a scary prospect, as you say, and there's so much changes being implemented lately, and obviously over the last couple of years, it makes it difficult for landlords. And I think the private rented sectors facilitates such a big part of the market and houses quite a lot of people. And I think a lot of people didn't appreciate that. I don't think so. I
don't think the government have a clue what they're doing sometimes. They need the private rented sector, especially in places like Edinburgh. Edinburgh thrives in the private rented sector. About 10% of all the workers in Edinburgh live in the private rented sector, and they can't have anywhere else because they need it for their job. They're working in investment houses, they're working in banks, they're working in, all these places that are key to Edinburgh, and they need that mobility just to get into there. And it's all very well to say that, you shouldn't be in the market and then these people would buy. Well, they don't, because they're on temporary contracts. They're on contracts of 2 years. So in order to buy a house, you'd have to pay the stamp duty, you'd have to pay the legal costs, you'd have to pay the mortgage, you'd have to commit yourself to a 20-year mortgage, 25-year mortgage. And then 2 years later, all of a sudden, it's like, well, I'm going to have to sell it now.
Yeah.
Like, all right. Then you've got the sales cost, you've got the legal cost, you've got all the other costs of moving to another property because you've got to go and find somewhere else. So that's one of the key things that we spoke about before. Why people like the mobility of labour, because they don't want to buy, because rental option is the best option for them.
Yeah, and rental makes it so much easier, and like you say, the cost that could be involved, depending on if circumstances change. It's so much easier and financially better off for people just to rent, like in areas like you say, like Edinburgh and things, when people are there working. So,
do you think the rents will continue to increase over the next 12 months?
I think they'll go up more. I mean, I wouldn't say any drastic increases are expected, but I do think that I think the level of interest in things like obviously the supply and demand thing that we're dealing with now, I think by the turn of the year it will level out. I think rents I'll jump up slightly more, but I mean nothing drastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a prediction. I think rents will continue to go up as well, purely for the fact that I suppose they're not really building that much houses. The Scottish government needs the industry to build 25,000 houses every single year.
Yeah, which isn't going to happen.
England needs 250,000 every single year, and you think 25,000 doesn't seem much in capacity, but when you look at it, I mean, in Fife alone, there's no that much being built. You can't, unless you've got a huge house builder that's prepared to build a 1,000. Look at St Andrews. Look at Joe Heaton. Joe Heaton's got plans for building 1,000 in St Andrews. I mean, when has St Andrews had any major build before? And when was that? Years ago.
Years ago, yeah.
Years ago. And Kilrymont Place and places like that. And that's 10, 20, 30, 30 years ago. And we're only building 1,000 in St Andrews now, if that. So where else is there going to get built? And Cooper as well. And then you think about Leavenmouth. You think about look at East Neuk. St Monans is 96 properties, but 46 are going to be sold in Lochie Homes and 46 are going to be social rent.
Yeah.
So that's hardly anything in East Neuk as well. So there's no abundance of properties getting built. So 25,000 in the scope of things is not really. It's quite unachievable sometimes. I don't think there's been a time that the house building industry's hit it in Scotland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like you say, obviously England's got a lot worse than us. I mean, they need a lot more housing. But if you look at the immediate areas that we obviously have houses being built on, there isn't a great proportion of that being obviously allocated to social housing. So,
social housing is a really good thing, and I go back to saying it should always be the council have the social housing, because the council make a decision based on needs and that they don't think about the profit aspect. If that makes sense. You could sit there and argue with me about a social housing provider is not a not for profit, but you have to make money in order to keep the business going. Whereas council housing don't necessarily operate that way. They have a completely different way the accountancy is done in local government, as opposed to normal mainstream accountants like myself previously, and how we think about, income and expenditure and profit. That's not how local government accountancy works. It's a completely different proposition.
Yeah.
Do you remember when the council used to build what was always known as the pensioners' houses? And there were little one-bedroom, one public room, kitchen, bathroom, and there was always a certain amount of them in every single council estate. And then, of course, when the council houses started getting sold off, people saw them as a good buy-to-let investment as well. And so when people are needing to downsize, there's nowhere for them to go. I know of people who are an older single adult now, widowed, and they're living in quite a large 3-bedroom maisonette council property, and there's nowhere for them to be rehoused. So there's no incentive at all for her to be put to somewhere else.
I can't disagree with that at all, Andrea. We see it all the time in St Andrews, where the older generation are in these big, huge houses. They want to sell to downsize. They want to continue to live in St Andrews, but there is no smaller properties for them to move to because they're not building them. So it's a classic example, as everybody's stuck in a property that they don't actually fit their requirements, and it's to make that happen in order to get them to a property that they should be in, and then it's almost like somebody could do a swap with someone else. An upgrader could do a swap with a downgrader, if that makes sense, in terms of the size, and it would all work perfectly. But the difficulty here is actually matching people and making sure that system works. Well, wait a minute, there's a business idea. I've just thought of something. Right, I'm off. I'm going to quickly write that down before nobody... I'm waiting on that, by the way. Nobody else does that. Hear that now. It's recorded.
One of the other things that I had, just looking through all these stats on the sheet, if the rentals are going up sort of on an average of 3%, people's wages are not going up that, and I did say that earlier on, but also people that are on furlough just now, they've lost out on 20% of their income. How can people afford to live anywhere?
Yeah, I know. You do see that, and obviously there is still a lot of people that are on furlough, and obviously their wages are slightly lower. And that is a good question about obviously how people are going to continue to afford in the rental sector. But we didn't seem to see a downturn in people, obviously the amount of people that are interested in rental properties. We have obviously got a lot of properties that we look after, and I expected, obviously with the impending lockdown and obviously furlough and everything that come in, we expected a lot more problems than what we've actually come across. I mean, small percentage have had issues, but to us, obviously looking at a shot of what obviously we've got, then I haven't seen any great issues. Not what I anticipated anyway.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, just to go on a bigger scale and look at this in terms of how it affects the whole of the UK, interestingly, the opposite has happened in central London, where rents, tenants they're having to pay has dropped by 3.8% in the last 12 months. That's quite interesting, because London usually sets a trend about what's to happen later on. Yeah. It's like everybody says what happens. Years ago, it used to be what happens in America will happen to us 3 years later. But obviously now it's almost like 3 months later, the way the economy is going, because we're now in this global village because of the way everything works. But it's interesting to see that. So as demand has dropped like a stone, it appears that central London tenants are looking to move out to the suburbs in search of bigger homes, gardens and greener open spaces. This is probably COVID that's driving this. Yeah. For example, the average rent for the 1-bedroom apartment in St John's Wood currently stands at a reasonable £1,817 a month. Whilst the 2-bedroom apartment in Kensington and Chelsea is currently an average bargain rent of £3,715 per month. Yes, they might be low compared to last year, yet for us in Fife, that still seems a lot of money. That's more than some people's wages.
I mean, like you say, London is usually quite a good indicator, so that's surprising to see that and hear those figures. But like, I think it is obviously due to COVID, and we're seeing the same kind of trends from people coming for the cities like Edinburgh and things, and they want out of the cities and into the rural areas, and I think that's where we're starting to see the increase in areas like East Nuke and things, and they're coming out of the cities.
Yeah. Also, there has been a further downward pressure on central London rents as many Airbnb landlords have dumped their short-term holiday lets properties onto the long-term rental market as tourism for the capital has dwindled because of the pandemic. That's a big, big thing that's hit them, isn't it? Especially now that when you think about it, we're in tiered lockdown zones. Yeah. So technically, I mean, tier 4 can't travel to tier 3, and I think tier 3 can't travel outside the area either. Is that correct?
But even counties in the same tier aren't allowed to travel between each other either.
Yeah, I mean that is a big effect on that. So that's why a lot of these people at Airbnb are now moving into long-term rents.
Yeah,
this has been the sharpest drop in central London since the summer of 2009, when the property market was still stumbling from the credit crunch. That's it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. So this means that the reverse of the trend of the 2010s, that's 2010 to 2018 to be exact, when initially the London property market was shooting up while the rest of the country was in the doldrums. And then when the rest of the UK did start to rise slowly in 2013, London kicked on even further like a rocket. Yet now it appears the opposite is actually happening. So getting back to Fife though, according to the Land Registry, property values currently stand at 3.3% higher than a year ago, and this is really split down as follows. Now, this is quite an interesting statistic here when we talk about the property values for sellers. Now, remember, this is historical, and I will explain to you why I said that. So, detached homes in Fife are 5.7% higher of that 3.3%, because remember, average means one's top, one's bottom, the meet in the middle on the average. Semi-detached Fife homes are 4.8% higher. Townhouses and terraced Fife homes are 3.4% higher. That's all higher. So guess where apartments are and flats? 0.4% lower. Is that quite a startling statistic when you think about it? I mean, why do we think that is?
People are not buying them now as buy to let because they're not seeing the income. They're not going to, it's not going to be beneficial for them to do that. And also buy-to-let mortgages, I think it's a 25% deposit.
Yeah.
That's out with
mortgages, 25% deposit. You're absolutely right, Andrea. It's quite a phenomenal amount of money to put down. There is obviously strategies in order to do that. You can get funding from venture capitalists and angel investors to go in with you if you've got a track record in buy-to-let. And some people are using that strategy, but yeah, it's no easy just to come up with 25%, especially if you're renting.
No, and I think for a buy-to-let perspective, we as myself as an agent and things see the demand for 2, 3, and 4 bedroom houses for tenants now. Everybody wants a house; they want the house set up with a garden, a back door, as opposed to a flat. And when I've got buy-to-let investors coming to me and saying, obviously, what do you think I should pick up, a flat or a house? My advice is, if the figures work for you, pick up a house. Because
it does make sense. I mean, I've said to landlords over the years, I mean, if a flat and a house is almost the same price, and you're maybe paying a £10,000 more, say for example in the Leadmouth area, then just go for the house. Because when it comes down to it, if it gets to a point where you've got a saturated market for the rental market, a tenant is going to pick a house first before they pick a flat to rent, if it's at the same value. And if you've only paid 10 grand more, you're not really losing that much return on investment. Plus the fact, if you do an exit strategy from that, a house is a lot more appealing to sell on to a first-time buyer or somebody that's actually downsizing, something like that. And whereas a flat is a bit more challenging. So if you're doing medium to long-term strategy, probably flats is the right way to go. Because it's money earners, it's cash cows as I call them, and it generates cash all the time. Whereas houses, they don't. But predominantly, getting back to that, I mean, I think the flats market is a combination of exactly what you said, Andrea. The 25% for buy-to-let has put them off. The 4% ADS, additional dwelling supplement, that landlords have to pay has put them off buying. So the landlord market is taking it out on there because there's not that demand from landlords and investors anymore. in terms of their mainstream anyway. There is holiday lets. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's where that's driving forward. And also the fact is you've got interest rates. There's a fine line here. If you're a sole trader and you're a high rate taxpayer and you're doing a buy-to-let mortgage on interest, it's only deductible at lower rate, so it actually makes it uneconomical sometimes to do it that way. But then if you go into a limited company, you actually pay a wee bit more in interest. So then it's almost like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because it's the same price for the investment return. Even though the limited company, you're giving a personal guarantee to the mortgage regardless. I don't think that's fair. If you're a limited company, you're having to give a personal guarantee to the mortgage that you should have to pay a higher rate than a normal sole trader would if you bought it in your own right, because you're buying it in your own right anyway, because you're still personally liable for it. Yeah,
I agree. That's not very fair, and I think, like we've discussed before, it's a numbers game. And when it comes to flats, then they are in the short term or the short to medium term cash cows. But I mean, in terms of longevity and capital appreciation, then I think obviously houses are the option to go for.
Flats will continue to move up. Here's the classic example: when the flats market will recover, and I'll guarantee you this, when interest rates start to go up.
Yeah.
So when interest rates start to go up, the flats market recovers because they become the more desirable, because this is what people can afford as first-time buyers. They can no longer afford the houses because finance is so expensive. And that's why when you got to, I think it was just before the credit crunch, and from the 2000s to the 2005, 2006, the flats market went ballistic. It went hugely up. I mean, I had bought houses in
the stage you bought.
I bought properties in early 2000s, just before that as well, and they tripled in value within 6 years, and then I offloaded about 10 of them. Because I couldn't see a point where I thought, oh, I'm going to get a lot more rent over a longer period of time, and this value in this flat's going to stay there. So I took that opportunity at that time, and then I took the opportunity again last year. When the market was buoyant again, I started to do that same strategy because I felt, that was right for me in terms of the exit. So, if anybody wants to talk about that, about exit strategies and why you would do that as an investor and when that would make sense, more than happy to discuss it with them. So just message me here later on, or private message me on my public profile, Jim Parker, official Jim Parker.
Yeah, that would be good because
the official Jim Parker, no, the real Jim Parker. I don't want to be Donald Trump.
That would be good, Jim, because I see there is a wee bit of increase in landlords that are exiting the market just now. But on the flip side, there is a lot of new buy-to-let investors coming forward and picking up things and entering the market as well. So, and I don't think it's all down to buy-to-let landlords leaving because of COVID. I just think there's a lot of different circumstances and things that contribute to landlords leaving the market. And sometimes if they've got a bigger portfolio, they need to do it properly.
Retirement as well. I mean, I worked out in order for me to take advantage of my capital gains, it'll take me 15 years.
To
actually exit completely in order to take my allowances every single year for capital gains. So it'll take me 15 years to exit. So if I start now, I'll exit at 54. Oh, just before I'm about 70. I'm supposed to be climbing Everest at 60-year-old, so I might not be here by then. So that's what's driving the market. I think in terms of buy-to-let landlords, the lower value there, and in terms of first-time buyers, they're obviously got cheap finance. They're going straight for houses straight away because that makes absolutely a perfect proposition. Interestingly enough, though, yet do remember that these figures that we've just talked about don't take into account the prices paid by desperate Fife buyers this summer. 100,000 more I got yesterday for a property. That's unbelievable. Often paid top dollar to secure a property. This will only filter through in the figures released in spring next year. So this will be interesting to see where we go in spring next year in terms of the numbers. So why are the banks curtailing the number of low deposit mortgages? Well, that's meaning that first-time buyers must find a much larger down payment before they're able to buy their first Fife property. I mean, this goes back to things like the First Home Fund. First Home Fund is essential, and obviously that's run out of money now. So that'll come back on stream in April next year. So the market will start to pick up then. What else have we got? Neil Burns from Cara Mortgages was actually telling me that some of the lenders are actually coming back to 90% loan to value. So there's some lenders coming back in. You've obviously still got, I mean, was that just a soundbite that Boris said about 95% mortgages?
Yeah, I mean, they're still out there. I mean, they're not totally gone. But it's good to hear that Neil's obviously saying that they're coming back around again. But although obviously the amount of products at that level have reduced, they are still available.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's also the help to buy with the new build schemes as well, and there's a lot of incentives that new homes can offer, like all your white good packages, carpets, gardens, and then you've got the guarantee for 10 years. If anything goes wrong with your home in that 10 years, it's covered with the NHSBC. NHSBC?
NHI, I don't know. A combination of both. National Shanghai Bank.
It's that one.
We know what you're talking about, that one.
Yeah, that one. But a thing that I did read recently was that people who take help to buy a new build have to be really careful that they can't always then, if they have to find that they've got to move on, they can't then become a landlord and rent that property out until they've paid back a proportion of their mortgage.
Yeah.
That's another thing that we need to think about.
Listen, does anybody bother about that?
No.
I mean, if you look at every buy-to-let mortgage, it says you're not supposed to be renting to the DSS market. That's in every single condition of buy-to-let mortgages,
right.
And yet every single landlord rents to the DSS market.
That's a guaranteed income. Why would you not go for that option?
Yeah. I always warn landlords to check their landlord's insurance, because sometimes it's in the conditions of their landlord's insurance that invalidates it if they're renting to people in receipt of benefits. And I've seen landlords being stung by it in the past.
We had a landlord stung up to what, £18,000, £20,000?
Yeah.
Because he didn't read the small print, and he ended up having it, and it took him 2 years to try and recover it through legal action. And how he successfully recovered it, because he argued that they had housing benefit in the conditions when it's actually called local housing allowance now.
Yeah.
So he successfully argued that with them, they hadn't changed their conditions. So he was not renting to a housing benefit market. He was renting to local housing allowance market, which was perfect.
Well, I mean, and it's good that he caught them with a loophole, because obviously...
Because they didn't update their terms. That's really what it came down to. Mm-hmm. So the reason that banks are fearful of house price... the reason is that banks are fearful really of the house price crash in 2021. Although, if you recall, I wrote about that a few weeks ago about the reasons why that's probably less likely to happen. They're too afraid of the frothy nature of the property market since the end of the first lockdown in late spring. The bank is lending its own money to buyers, and no mortgage lender wants to be holding an enormous amount of these types of high percentage mortgages if house prices fall in 2021, because the bank would be saddled with negative equity and repossessions on their hands. And we all know what that did to the housing market in the late 1980s. Well, I do. Richard, you were too young.
I wasn't here. I could read about it.
And the early 1990s, as repossessions rocketed, when you think about it. I mean, we saw repossessions rocket in the credit crunch. I mean, in 1 year, I think we ended up having 60 repossessions come through our books in the credit crunch. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it about the amount of repossessions. And I don't think that'll ever happen again, because the government has learned a lot of lessons. And that's probably the reason why I'm comfortable that the market will still continue to stay stable next year, because the government will do everything in their power. They cannot afford the banks to fail, because if the mortgages and negative equity happens and the housing market's affected, it has a knock-on effect to the mortgage market, which has a knock-on effect to the exposure of the banks, and therefore they'll all be breaking their whatever their trust deed or their requirement or their debt equity ratio. They'll all be breaking that immediately. So then we'll go through another credit crunch effectively.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think hopefully governments learned their lessons and wouldn't let the situation get to what it was like before, or then we're in trouble.
I think so, yeah. This can quite clearly be seen by the pricing and availability of low mortgage deposits, as the Bank of England has reduced its base rate to 0.1% in the last 12 months. 10% deposit mortgage rates have actually increased from 2 to 2.8%. That's a fly one, eh? They're putting it up a bit, eh? I've got some mortgage lenders are actually still sitting on their variable rates at 6 and 7%. I've heard in buy to let. That's shocking. But they're taking advantage of the situation. They're taking advantage of landlords, because I know a particular landlord. They're taking advantage of the landlord because he doesn't have, when he borrowed, it was 10% for a buy to let mortgage. Now they're wanting 25%, and the equity hasn't gone up that much in the house because it's been done interest only. So therefore, he's stuck in that mortgage at 6 and 7%, whether he likes it or not, because he can't get the 25%. And if he wants out of it, he'll have to pay down towards that, in order to decrease their exposure. So they've got them over a barrel, some of them, to a degree. Also, when lenders have been offering 10% mortgages throughout the summer, borrowers have had only a 24-hour window to commit before the lender withdraws the mortgage product from the market because of oversubscription. Neil talked about that a couple of weeks ago. As soon as they put a product on, everybody rushes for it and basically say, we'll have to withdraw it. It's almost like the internet crashing.
Yeah, I heard Neil cover that with you the last time. I think it was when he was on with you and Andrea. And too, they bring out a new product, and everybody runs to take advantage of it, and then obviously they need to withdraw. So,
Phil says their banks are taking advantage.
That'll
never happen, Phil. Banks will never take advantage of us. Right. They basically do that every single day.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Phil.
Yeah, so as with all economics, if demand is greater than supply, then clearly the prices go up. That extra 0.8% doesn't sound a lot, but when you realise a first-time buyer would have to pay an additional, here it is, for a 0.8% increase, a first-time buyer would have to pay an additional £167 a month in interest payments on a 10% mortgage, assuming they borrow £250,000. I've had first-time buyers at £250,000 borrowing. I still can't work that out, how they can get that. But there is lending out there. I've even had a first-time buyer walk in and say, I'm a £360,000 house. Like, what?
That doesn't make sense.
I still didn't get that. I mean, I could only get £20,000, but then interest rates were 15% when I was borrowing.
Yeah.
So that
it's not a big deposit, though. They've maybe had an inheritance that's allowed them to have a huge deposit there, and there's a guarantee that they can repay that amount.
In situations like that, you could only assume that that's obviously going to be the setup, especially if they're first-time buyers and buying at that level. So.
Yeah. However, it's not all doom and gloom for first-time buyers, as there are embryonic signs that the 10% mortgage market could gradually be returning to normal. As I have recently heard, some lenders are taking up to a week for their 10% deposit mortgages offers to run out. So fingers crossed. Really, that's the key here. I think more and more are coming back into mainstream again. A bit of nerves. I think it's given them a lot of confidence at the fact that furlough's been extended. Because you notice that I'm sure there's a strong correlation between the fact that furlough was announced to be extended from the end of October. The 6-month holiday was extended as well on your mortgage payments. So I think that gave a lot of lenders that comfortable degree of certainty that the income will still go on just now to enable the mortgage market to keep going. I mean, is that what you guys think? Is that similar thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think so, yeah.
I'm just wondering, if they've extended the furlough, but there's not been any detail yet about whether they're going to extend the stamp duty holiday further. That would be helpful to keep the economy going.
Absolutely. I've got a sneaking suspicion that's going to be extended next March. I'm actually convinced that'll probably be extended, but only time will tell, and it could be famous last words. So what does this mean for Fife landlords? Those Fife landlords with properties with gardens and larger rooms will be seeing increased demand. The ability to have pets in rental property is also an advantage, and depending on the property, can add a decent premium to the rent that can be charged. Premium to the rent that can be charged. That's quite an interesting one, because you've seen closing dates on rents recently, Richard, haven't you?
Yeah, we've had such a lot of interest on individual properties. We're, basically setting closings and people are voluntarily, without even being asked sometimes, offering higher rents, offering so much up front. And I think, like you say, properties that have got a lot more outside space, bigger rooms, or even the extra rooms for people working from home are the ones that are receiving quite a lot of interest. And also the pet thing, and some landlords are a bit reluctant with pets. I always tell them to always consider pets. I think if you completely exclude them, it narrows the market right down. I think that if you look at tenants on an individual basis, and then consider whether you're going to accept them and their pet. And also, people who have got pets are quite willing to pay an extra pet deposit, we've started to call it. And if they pay an extra £300-400 to bring their wee dog with them, then it demonstrates that they're serious about obviously looking after the property, and they're serious and passionate about their pet. Sometimes it's not the pet that's the problem, it's the person looking after it. If they're not looking after it properly, then it's going to cause damage. So yeah.
I think a top tip for a landlord is actually to go and check out how they live just now. The previous tenant, the tenant. I've often done that and just doorstep people and said, I'm in the area, could I pop in and have a chat with you? And then it allows me to see how that person lives.
People nowadays voluntarily say, you could come and see where I am now, and because obviously they're so keen to obviously move forward or move on for whatever reason. And 9 times out of 10 tenants, I mean, we've got a lot of good tenants, look after their property, and majority of them, a lot of them do have pets. I think obviously landlords throughout the years maybe sometimes have been caught out with pets and properties, and they can cause a lot of damage if they're not looked after properly in a property. So,
do you think the right across the board thing about no pets should be then not an option? You shouldn't say that in an advert.
I advise against that. I don't think it's. I say you should always consider pets, and like I say, then consider it on an individual basis. I mean, if you say no pets and you've got a nice mature couple who have got a wee dog, I mean, what harm is that going to do? They're going to look after it, or somebody that's got one cat that spends half the time outside. But as soon as you put no pets on a listing, you're excluding them right out, and they could be the ideal tenant.
I've said it before. I've had people coming along and phone them up and saying, "Do you do a pets policy?" I says, "What you got? A goldfish?"
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow. When you think about it, if I put no pets in my advert, that person would never have phoned me. And they're considering their goldfish as a pet. And I'm saying, and they're saying, they see an advert that says no pets. They go, well, I'll no phone then. So you're absolutely right. I personally have on my adverts, I've always said I would consider pets on a case by case basis. If somebody's going to turn up and I've got 6 dogs, it's like, well, clearly that's not going to work for me because I don't have a house big enough for that. If somebody comes up and says exactly what you said, I've got a gerbil. It's like, okay, fine. It's in a cage. It's not going to do any. It's not going to do any damage. It's not going to gnaw through the front door. It's not going to rip the carpet up. It's a gerbil. But if you put no pets in your advert straight away, you're precluding all these people. They'll never inquire.
Yeah, and some landlords didn't realise that if you do put no pets, somebody like to say, some people might perceive that as well. I've got a fish, or I've got a lizard, or whatever, and it's in a tank. They consider that's their pet. So
that's actually quite a big one. You get a lot of people like that now, snakes and lizards.
Yeah. So,
I remember speaking to someone. They phoned up inquiring about one of the rental properties, and they said, "Oh, do they allow pets?" And I said, "Well, it'd be taken on a case-to-case basis." And they said, "Well, it's just I've got a small pet." I says, "Oh, what kind of? I think it'd be a hamster or a rabbit or something." She says, "Oh, it's a chihuahua." I says, "That's not a small pet. That's a dog."
that's still small.
I've had people throwing up and saying, "I've got a pet." I went, "Okay, it's a tarantula." I've even had somebody phoning up saying, "My snake's disappeared, has escaped. I've had to phone the police." It's like, what? What are you doing with a snake in the first place that you're having to phone the police?
We've actually got a tenant who's got and he's got permission for the council and things, and he's got an entire room and it's snakes. It's a brilliant tenant. He's been there for years. But yeah, he's got that. So, and like I say, doesn't do any harm.
I don't want to be doing the property inspection.
Well, thanks not so much. I wouldn't like to do a property inspection with a tarantula.
I'm an estate agent. Get me out of here.
There have been cases, I remember, it wasn't with Fife Properties, but another property had a rental, a really nice bungalow rental. It was a 2-bedroom, quite small, but this couple wanted to rent it. It was like £950 a month in a really nice area, but they had a 10-year-old son, and the landlord just said absolutely no children in that. It's for a professional couple, really. It's not big enough for children. And I said to him, I said, look, £950 a month, you could be paying a mortgage. And I actually went through the whole mortgage advice with him, got him set up with an appointment. He got Help to Buy, and he's now probably been about 4 years in his own property, a brand new build with his wife and his son, and he was absolutely delighted with that. So, but get back to that. I mean, some landlords don't even like children in properties, so sometimes they can be a bit. Pets can be easier.
I've had that. It's like, what? You've got a 3-bedroom house and you're not wanting children, or you've got a 5-bedroom house and you don't want children. Who do you think, a professional couple, is going to rent a 5-bedroom house? I mean, it's few and far between. Your total market consists of about 2 people in the whole of Fife.
Yeah.
And they've both got properties already that they're happy with.
Yeah, I don't know if you're thinking about the same landlord as me, Jim, but I've had that in the past.
Yeah, you get it now and again, don't you?
Yeah.
So one final thought. Oh, God, that's 56 minutes already. Talk too much, eh? One final thought for all the homeowners in Fife: be aware it's going to be very challenging to get your house purchase through in time to meet the 31st of March deadline for the stamp duty holiday cut-off. So if you're starting the process in November, make sure your lender and solicitor have the capacity to meet the deadline when you're asked for the information. Please drop everything into them as quick as possible. That's my first advice to everybody. As soon as you come on the market, get in touch with your solicitor, ask them what they need, what they want, tell them about everything about your listing your house for sale. We tell them as well anyway, so they can get the titles ordered up, they can get any property inquiry certificates done, we can get everything in place. So when we actually get a confirmed offer accepted, we're way ahead of the game. Yeah. You know, because a standing start, you're beyond there. You know, the odd delay here and there will mean the difference when you getting the keys to your new Fife home before the end of March 2021 and saving thousands of pounds on stamp duty. I mean, we're talking about over £2,000, you know, for the people that are buying up to 250 and beyond, or feeling a fool on the 1st of April and having to pay the tax. You know, that's it. I wouldn't want to be the one that's on the 1st of April, you know, April Fools, having to pay the tax. You like that pun?
Yeah, it's quite cutting. So, but some people will find themselves in that circumstance if in that situation, if they don't, like you say, to reiterate what we spoke about in previous weeks, if you didn't do the prep and have things in place, then you'll lose out, and it'll be a costly mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Final roundup on all your thoughts on this. What we've discussed so far, Richard. What's your thoughts? First-time buyers being locked out the Fife property market and rents rising.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going to continue, obviously, and I do anyway, to keep an eye on rents and see where they're going to go as we come out at the end of this year and into the turn of next year. Be interesting to see how that goes. I think also, like I say, I've got a lot of new buy-to-let landlords entering the market. It's a really good time.
There is an abundance of money out there because you're not getting a return in the bank. So the reality is you can still make up to 15% net return on investment. Because I've shown that loads of times in models and actual spreadsheet models where the numbers actually make absolute sense. I mean, a net return of 15% is absolutely astronomical considering you get nothing in the bank. So there still is good returns to make in buy-to-let. And if you need to speak to us, then by all means, contact Richard.
I'm helping a few landlords, new landlords to the market now, and as part of their retirement or whatever. So definitely.
It's like what you says is one person exit, one person enters.
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of thing. It's like it's like I'm now retiring. So I tell you what, I'm actually just going to. I'm coming in now because it's the new blood to the market. It's a life cycle at the end of the day.
And what's good as well is
Sorry, on you go.
What's good as well is we have properties with long-standing tenants that are obviously the landlords are now selling up, so the new ones are picking them up. They've got tenants in place, instant income. It swings around.
That's a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. It's a ready-made income. A lot of landlords actually get started because they like the buzz. They like the buzz of the refurbishment. They like the buzz of the buying and all the rest of it. But to be honest, if you get it right, boring pays well.
Yeah.
You know, and actually having a ready-made tenant and a ready-made property, and you just putting your money into it and taking it over, and it makes money from day one, is a great formula for me.
Yeah.
That makes absolute sense. Boring pays well every single time. It works. Excitement costs money. I would say. Andrea, what's your thoughts?
My sort of final thoughts on it are, estate agents are there to help give you advice on whether, you know, what you're thinking of buying or renting. They can put you in the direction of the right people for mortgage advice, conveyancing advice, and, you know, take time. Don't take too long, but take your time and make sure you're making the right decision for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I'm going to say thanks very much to James, Joanna, Jim, Jimmy. Thanks very much for popping in. I mean, I know it's your birthday weekend, so happy birthday. Have a great time. And Phil, final thoughts from Phil says, and exactly what he said, the bank's taking advantage. And that's for this weekend. I'll be on the Fife Property Weekly Roundup tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. So if you want to join me then, it will be a weekly roundup for the Fife Property Market and maybe a wee few top tips on how to do something in a particular area. If you've got any preferences you want me to address or any questions you want to address, please leave a message here or for tomorrow night's show, or you can message me direct. So until next time, and even until the Fife Property Show next week at 9:30 on Saturday morning, thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Richard. Okay. Thanks so much for now, guys. See you later. Bye.